Using Python, we can create and backup data from an SQLite database to and from SCV files. We can create related tables with integrity. By the end of this video, you will also know how to insert data into tables with working primary and foreign keys. Before we can look at our Python, we have to make sure our database is correct. Previously, we messed about with some test data. That was fine before, but now we want to move up a level and look at our test database. So what do we need to do? Well, this is the table before. It was quite simple and it was okay for testing. But now we want to make sure our database has integrity, make sure the data is correct. So these aren't finished. We need to add constraints. So we can add constraints like keys and not null. But what are these? So here's a list of constraints. We've got the primary and foreign key. We've got things like not null and unique, and default and index check. So let's have a look what they are. Well, we know about primary and foreign keys. So we can just put the terms primary key onto our column, that's the primary key, and we also make a foreign key inside a table that reference the primary key from the other table. So we'll do that in this video. Other things we might use, not null means that a column has to have a value inside it. You can see examples here. Unique, exactly what you think it means you can't have duplicate values. We've got check. So for example, here in this example, we've got age is greater than or equal to 18. We've got default, gives a default value. And if we want to access things easily, we can create an index on them. So if you're going to use like searches on the last name, for example, then we can create an index so it's easy to find last names. So our table before, this is an example of customers previously without no keys or checks, etc., no constraints, now changes to using primary key. We're going to use auto increment, so we don't have to keep putting the key in our cells. We've got not null in last name. And at the bottom, there's a note saying auto increment is only allowed on an integer primary key. So you might use something like a small int otherwise. If you're using auto increment, it has to be integer. So our other tables, we have items. Here we've checked the price is greater than or equal to 0. Orders, again, auto increment on an integer primary key. Here we see our first foreign key, the customer ID from customer tables, is referenced inside orders. And finally, order line, again we've got the foreign key from orders, order ID, and from items, item ID. Now before we do anything, we need to know how to back up our data. So we can see here our Python code. We're going to back up any data that's in our database. Now we've created some functions. Here we're going to get everything from the customer table. We can open up a CSV file and we're going to put all that data into a CSV file. Now the same code we can do for items and for orders and for order line. So we need to basically just open up our database and then back up each table using Python. If you want to delete your data within a table, you can use delete. But if you want to remove the table completely, you use drop. Here we're going to drop the table's customers, items, orders and order line. So that will mean we remove everything and start from scratch. If you do this, make sure you back up your data first. You want to make sure you have your data somewhere else before you start messing about deleting or dropping tables. So we know how to drop tables and we know how to create tables. So in our Python code, we connect to our database. Now we can drop the tables. We can check to see if they exist first. And if they do, then we can drop them. We can do that for our orders, our items, customers, order line. Best to do it in a certain order, and then we can create our tables. We're going to create customers first and then items because these have no foreign keys, and then we do orders and order line. We can execute the statements, commit them, and then close the connection to the database. When we run our code, you can see it's worked fine. So dropping tables, you drop the ones with the most foreign keys first, then go backwards. When you create table, create the ones without the foreign keys first, and then the ones with the foreign keys afterwards. We want to put our data in our database using Python. So we start off by getting the data from the CSV file. Now this data is correctly formatted with the headings exactly how we want it in the database. So we can put the column headings in a list, and then we're going to insert the data from those columns that are in the CSV file, the data, into our database using an insert SQL statement, and in Python we're going to use execute many to put that in. We're going to do this with customers. We're going to commit that, and then we're going to do it with items. So we connect to the database first, we create a cursor, we open up our CSV file, and then we put the data in this list format, and then we're going to put those lines of data inside our database using execute many. We check by getting the customers, and then we print to say it's done correctly. And we're going to do the same for items. Now, because our database has primary keys and foreign keys, we have to make sure we do this in order. So we can put customer items in first because they don't have any foreign keys. So now, let's see if we can put our data from our CSV files into our database using Python. Let's run the program. Okay, so we've got our items in there. And how about our customers? We've got a lot of items, and there's our customers. That's great. Now let's move on to our orders. With our orders, we have to make sure we put everything in correct and in order. So we open up our CSV file and we're going to put in the details of our orders. Now remember, we have a foreign key in here, customer ID, so we have to make sure every data is put in correctly, otherwise we're going to get an error. Now if the orders goes in correctly, we can then put in the order lines where we have 2 foreign keys. So if this goes in correctly, we know our database has integrity, the data's in correctly, and everything works fine. So let's run our program. That's great. Our order lines have gone in, and so have our orders. So now we need to check our data in the actual database, but it looks good. So let's check our database. We can open up our database. We can already see our customer data. We have our items. So the data's in the database. What about orders? We have the orders and the order line. Now we had that before, but what's slightly different, you can see the data's in the correct format, and if we look at our tables, you can see when we look at the tables, you can see we have the primary key in our customers as well as our items. We look at the orders table, we have the primary key and the foreign key of the customer ID, and the order line as well will have 2 foreign keys in there. So not only is our data in the database, but our database has integrity now. So the tables are correctly linked together. They're related tables. We can have a look at our code. We started off with the simple select statements in functions orders, get order line, get customers, get items, so we can check our data's in the database. We connect to our database using SQLite 3, create a cursor. Now we open our CSV file and we get the data into our list, which we can then put into our database using execute many. We just checked our data and then committed it, and we did the same with order line. Now you have to be careful, the database is not open, then it might be locked, and if you have any errors you might put your data in first, and then when you run it again your data is already in there, which will then create an error. So it does take a little bit of practice, but you want to make sure everything is perfect for it to work. But if it's perfect, it does work. You put the data in using this code using Python. Okay, thank you for watching. If you haven't already, please subscribe, and if you got anything from this video, please give us a like.